All right, welcome and thank you for joining today's webinar, Implementing an Effective Vulnerability Management Program to Minimize IT Security Risk in Your Organization, with cybersecurity expert Derek A. Smith. You're also joined by BeyondTrust Retina Product Manager, Alex DeCosta, who will run through a brief demo of BeyondTrust Retina Enterprise Vulnerability Management Solution towards the end of the webinar, so be sure to stick around for that. My name is Sarah, and I'm your host today. And before we dive into the webcast, I just wanted to touch on a few housekeeping items. First thing, all attendee lines are muted. However, in an effort to keep this interactive, I encourage you all to ask your questions via the chat box in the GoToMeeting console. We will try to cover your questions at the end of the webinar during our Q&A time. Also, today's session is being recorded, and as attendees, you will all receive the link to the recording and the PowerPoint via an email later this week. So at this point, I'd like to hand the phone line over to Derek. Hey, Derek, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today, and please take it away. It's all yours.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here once again. I want to welcome everyone. Good to be here with you once again talking about vulnerability management. So today I'm going to talk about how you all can implement an effective vulnerability management program in order to minimize risk in your organization. I want to start off by saying I work for a very risk-averse organization. I work for a healthcare organization, and we have 98% of the market, the healthcare market. And with that, we're in the data analytics, so we have much more PHI, personal health information, and things like that than any other organization, because all those organizations are our clients. Therefore, we have all their information. I say that because that makes us a large target for hackers or anyone else who wants to get PHI, personal health information. As you all probably know, your personal health information is actually more valuable than your credit card information out on the black market. So let me tell you, we have a staff of, we have a large staff of security folks, let's say that, and we stay busy, and we're still growing on a regular basis, on a daily basis actually. So with that being said, I want to talk about vulnerability management, talk about its importance, and kind of just have a conversation with you about what you can do to make yours better. So on our agenda, we're going to talk about what vulnerability management is, the laws of vulnerabilities, why we need vulnerability management. The vulnerability management lifecycle will be touched on briefly. 4 steps that you can use to reduce vulnerabilities, risk and vulnerability management best practice. I'm going to give you several of those. And then we're going to talk a little bit about using automated tools for your vulnerability management process, which is very important. So first of all, let's start with what is vulnerability management. And most of you all on this call probably know what it is already. But there's 2 things I want to touch on. First of all is protection from your internal vulnerabilities. Things such as machines that don't have the latest hot fixes or service packs added to them. I'm sorry, are you all still seeing? Good. Service packs added to them. Also, people who have inappropriate rights to files within your organization, directories and things like that. Users who have no passwords or passwords that's easily guessed, or accounts that have not been disabled, employees who no longer work for your company. It goes on and on and on. But we also protect ourselves from external vulnerabilities as well, things like unknown or unsecured IP devices that we may have, open ports, or now everybody is using bring your own device and mobile devices, so that's a big factor as well. And again, the external vulnerabilities can be your easily guessed passwords for somebody to come in and end up being the insider threat. Now, vulnerabilities on your network are what cyber criminals are after. As I said before, we have a large amount of PHI information in my organization, and as I said, we're targeted on a daily basis. We have a security operations center, we have incident responders, we have investigators, all these things within our organization to try to keep your health information safe. As I said, we're in 98% of the community. So basically, we provide, the criminals are looking for ways that they can provide or obtain unauthorized entry into our networks, into your networks. And by them getting in, they can expose our confidential information, they can steal our identities, they can violate our privacy laws, they can just basically paralyze our operations. So these are things that we're worried about. Okay? So exposure through these vulnerabilities is extreme for our networks, for our organizations in general, and as we know, our devices become very vulnerable with our intellectual property that we have on them. I have some sources of vulnerabilities up on the slide here: programming errors, unintentional mistakes, user error, of course, improper systems configuration, and it goes on and on. Mobile is, of course, becoming a big issue. And I'll tell you this, in my field, healthcare IT, and another area is nuclear IT. Nuclear folk, I travel a lot and I speak, and they look for people work in nuclear power plants and the nuclear industry because they can't find enough cybersecurity people in those two industries. But going on, also the need, despite us utilizing basic defenses that we use in our organization, network security breaches are still everywhere. And you can pick up the paper any day. Some of the old ones, TJX, exposed $46 million records. DSW, a lot of the recent things that we see in the news. Matter of fact, there's almost a day you can't pick up some paper somewhere or turn on some news show and find that there's records that's been exposed. And it can be government or it can be private industry. So it's happening all over the place. One of the things I want to say, though, is that automation for vulnerability management is crucial. And why is that? Because manual detection basically and remediation is just too slow. The workflow when we're doing this is too slow. Using manual means we are not able to keep up with all the vulnerabilities that are out there and all the things that are happening and at the speed that they're happening. Another thing is it's too expensive. You have to have specifically trained staff and enough of them in order to deal with this thing if you're going to deal with it manually. When we can automate some of these processes, some of these mundane processes, and have a machine do it, have some type of software do it for us. And oftentimes doing it manually is ineffective. And let me just give you an example. When I was at the Army Research Lab, I ran what's called Computer Network Defense. And we had 24/7 operations. And, and they still do, and I don't want to down those operations. However, I'll say this. For every hour of information or hour of data that came through our system, our network, we only really had 10 minutes that we could look at this data. And actually, it was live, but we had to capture that data and kind of look at it and then be ready to capture more and look at it. So, so you can, and then there's also human error. So you can see that if you have something automated set up that's going to have bells and whistles and alert you to problems that this human may not see or get tired or whatever it may be, then that's going to be a much better process. All right. On this slide, I have some attack trends. Increased professionalism and commercialization of malicious activities. The bad guys are getting better, and they're putting a lot of money into getting better and a lot of money and time and effort into trying to obtain our secrets. Threats are increasingly tailored towards our specific regions, our organizations, our businesses, whatever it may be. Conversions of attack methods. And now, people used to hack because they could say they broke into NASA or something like that. But, it's been years now that they've been saying now they're hacking for money. It's become big business. It's become syndicates and large opportunities in hacking. Some of you probably noticed if you've been with me before, but I spent 18 years as a federal agent chasing these type of activities. Now I'm doing it from another side and trying to prevent them in the first place. One of the biggest things about law enforcement is that we always have to be reactive. And now we're finally in IT security, cybersecurity, we're finally trying to find ways for us to be proactive. And vulnerability management systems is one of those ways to be proactive. So from my job, from studying, from looking around, what have we learned? Well, we've learned that most vulnerabilities are known long before we're exploited. We know certain things out there, Heartbleed or whatever you want to come up with. We know these things. Of course, we don't know when it's a 0 day, but we know eventually what's out there and what a threat is, what type of threats may come to our organization. So it's not new. We've also learned that successful exploitation of vulnerabilities can cause substantial damage and financial loss to our systems, our organization. We learned that a few vulnerable systems can disrupt the whole network, can disrupt many systems within our organization. And we also know that system misconfiguration can make systems vulnerable over time. Matter of fact, it can make them vulnerable immediately. Okay? Some of the challenges we face: not enough time, not enough people, not enough budget. And I'll say this: right where I work now, we have a very nice budget, and we have more money than I think our department's getting more money than any other department right now. However, we still have some shortcomings. We still have more money to spend. And another thing is that we're trying to become more of just a cost center. We want to see it be a profit center. We have some ideas for that. But there's never enough time. There's never enough people. I can never find enough bodies. In this local area where I am, in Washington, D.C. area, we don't really have many new bodies coming into the market. We're shifting pieces around like a chessboard. Someone leaves one organization, we pick them up at ours, and it goes on and on that way. So why should we implement this vulnerability management strategy in the first place? Well, first of all, we know there's multiple threats across our complex IT infrastructure, and all of us have them. We all have the complex IT infrastructure no matter where it is that you work. We also have multiple IT managers who are accountable for specific pieces of information or specific pieces of their infrastructure, but not all of it. So these people have to work synergistically to make sure that they keep their systems safe. We have native tools that don't provide enterprise-level consolidated assessment and auditing. So we have to figure out how to work around this using our vulnerability management strategy or systems. A breach in any one area, any one of our areas within our organization, can affect our entire infrastructure of that organization. So now we have a problem there. The smallest thing that we might think may not be a problem, like not updating a patch in time, could be a big problem. Or updating a patch in time and not knowing how it's going to affect our system. Organizations have to comply with some type of mandated standards, practices across their enterprise. I'm in healthcare, so I have high tech, high test, HIPAA, a lot of things that we have to be cognizant of when we're doing our daily business activities. And then we have time and efficiency gained through using a vulnerability management strategy versus, as I said before, something like a manual process. Now let's take a look at the process. It has 6 phases. First, we have discovery. I'm going to go deeper into each one of these as we go. We have discovery. We have our assessment prioritization, I misspelled it, and allocation. We have our assessment scanning, reporting and technical and executive type activities we have to do. I'll talk about that. We have our remediation, and we have our verification, which consists of scanning. Let's look at each one of these. First thing we have to do is we have to map our system and know what it is we're protecting. When I was out in the field doing assessments, evaluations of other people's organizations, oftentimes we would do mapping and find things that people didn't even know existed on there. It could be a fax somewhere, a fax machine somewhere. It could be a laptop sitting somewhere in the office. When I was at DOD, they had things in the field that they never knew they had, or things come in and out of their network because it was kind of not static but dynamic network. Also, it enables the detection of rogue devices, as I was just saying. You actually map and know what's on your network, what kind of activity is there. So we might detect these things by first mapping and knowing what we're dealing with. Next, we have to prioritize our assets. Once we figure out what we have to do asset prioritization, which means some assets are more critical to our business than others. So we have to figure out what those things are and prioritize them. Criticality of those assets depends on our business. It has an impact on our business. Also, we have to do asset allocation. Each asset needs to have an owner. Somebody has to know what's on the system, and somebody has to have onus of it, take onus of it. So those are the 2 pieces for asset prioritization. We have to do an assessment, and two things we have to be cognizant of here. We need to do signature classification, which means we need to look at our vulnerability signatures, our application fingerprints, our service signatures, our configuration signatures. It goes on and on. Compliance, of course, compliance signatures. We have to be cognizant of these, and we have to know what they are. And then we have to look at what we call timely signature. Look at how many devices we have at a given time. What is our remote services at a given time? Again, our vulnerability signatures. How many vendors do we have operating within our infrastructure? We have to know these things. We have to do an assessment of these things. How many products do I have in general? And then we go to scanning. And scanning needs to be, it needs to take what I call an outside-in and inside-in approach to security. So it has to emulate the attack route of a hacker. It has to look at how would a hacker do it. They have to test the effectiveness of our security policy, and it has to not just our policy but also our controls. and examine our network infrastructure for what our vulnerabilities are. We have to figure out what it is that we're susceptible to. And then it provides, by scanning, it provides tools for untrusted and authenticated scanning. We have to have tools for both. But we have to scan our systems, and we should do it on a regularly scheduled basis. And, well, not just that. We do it on a regularly scheduled basis, but, of course, you all know penetration testing. We might want to have someone come in and perform an unscheduled penetration test. Of course, we would know about it as the security leaders. However, an organization would not know about it. And it's important to do that, I would say, at least once a year. Then we have to report out what we found. Okay? Reporting allows for generation, storage, and distribution of reports for large enterprise networks. At least our vulnerability management system should do that. We should be able to generate reports for various compliance initiatives that we may have, you know, SOX, PCI, our HIPAA compliance things that come through. We need to look at our security trends over a period of time, our business risks. All these things need to be looked at. Auditing, for instance, we produce reports for auditing. We need to report by business units or by our asset groups, and we need, again, to look at our security trends over time to see what's happening within our infrastructure. And then once we find out what's happening, once we find what we need to find out about what we own, then we need to do remediation. And we should have some type of system in our vulnerability management system that would generate tickets automatically when we complete those scans that I was just talking about. So tickets should be generated, either generated automatically upon scan completion based on the policies that we have in place, or based on demand from our user groups that we may have. The auditors may need something that we need to send out to them. Okay? Then we want to verify. Once we fix things, once we remediate, once we handle our POAMs, some people used to call them, we have to go ahead and back and rescan and verify that all the applied patches, all the things that we have done conform to compliance. I got confirm, but conform to compliance, but also that we have everything that we need, not just compliance. Because so often, especially in the government systems and, you know, even in healthcare and some other places, we are driven by compliance, by government regulations. But that's not enough. We need to also make sure that we're doing due diligence in everything we need to do to protect ourselves, our customer, our clients, whomever they may be. And then we need to verify the tickets that we've done, that we did in the remediation phase, are done, and make sure that they're closed. There's been many times in the field where I would go back and I would check tickets, and I find so many open tickets that may have been actually taken care of, but they didn't come back and close the ticket. So it's just a basic thing we need to do. So what are the benefits of having a good vulnerability management program? Well, one of the things is this. It gives you control. It gives you control and visibility of your network so that you can manage your network security effectively, and then you can document the compliance. Let's say you go for ISO 27001 or wherever it may be. You know, you have to continually document your compliance. You have to show your compliance on a regular basis. If you're dealing with the government, you know, they're going to come in every 2, 3, whatever the schedule is, 3 years, 1 year, and you have to show that you're compliant, you're in compliance, and with continuous monitoring, maybe even more so. But not only that, what did I say when we first began? Vulnerability management is a proactive approach to security. And we have to start focusing more on being proactive if we want to have effective security within our organizations. So I want to look at the laws of vulnerabilities. I have 4 of them here. The laws of vulnerabilities. Basically, what are they? Qualys, which is one of the leading companies out there, did a study on this. They published some research on years of analysis of vulnerability and exploit data that they have, and they came up with what's called the laws of vulnerabilities. And what these do is that they define vulnerabilities in the context of half-life, prevalence, persistence, and exploitation. And I'm going to briefly talk about each one of these as we go on. Now, I'm going to talk about some of the dynamics required to have a good network, and there's 4 of them, but let's hold off and get to that. Let's look at these first. So we talk about the law of half-life. Basically, we're looking at the half-life of critical vulnerabilities that we have, as it says, within 30 days, and doubles with lowering vulnerability. It's just a finding that we have. But the half-life is the critical vulnerabilities happen within 30 days and doubles with lowering degrees of severity within your systems. Now, some of the things that you notice I have here, well, let me go back to that just for a second. So basically, to break it down, that half-life reflects the difficulties you have in successfully patching large networks. So it's about patching system. The data that they had shows that the first month of a critical vulnerability, IT on average only mitigates the vulnerability in half of its networks. And then the second month, they find half of the remaining vulnerability systems protected, and so on as they go on. But what they found is this, lessons learned, is that you can't patch them all at once. You can't patch everything at one time. There's always going to be systems not connected to your network. Like people take their laptops home, you got to wait for them to connect. New assets added to your network and things like that. So these systems are going to be more vulnerable to exploit code or whatever until it's patched. You have to mitigate more than the remaining half of the vulnerabilities over the next month. Half of the network resources are protected in the first 30 days of the critical vulnerability, so the patch and distribution procedures are known to work. Then more than 50% of the remaining resources should be treated in the subsequent months. You have to work on those. You have to get those done. And then another one as far as half-life is that you have to improve the reduction of risk in the enterprise by shrinking the half-life to less than 30 days. So security teams should work strive to make improvements that reduce the current half-life of vulnerabilities. So in other words, since the current half-life is 30 days, your security team should work to reduce vulnerability half-lives in their particular organization. As I have here, best practice says that patch within 21 days for critical systems and a rollout procedure to other assets based on their priority level. So the more critical they are, the quicker you should, or the more susceptible to exploitation they are, the faster you should get those things fixed. All right? The next one is the law of prevalence. So we talked about 50% of the most prevalent and critical vulnerabilities are replaced by new vulnerabilities on an annual basis. So what does that mean? We need to do certain things. First, we need to, first, as I said, new critical vulnerabilities occur throughout the year. So if you leave these undetected and unpatched, new vulnerabilities can undo all the security, the hard work that you've done through your security team over that year. So you have to stay vigilant, and you have diligent and vigilant, I'm saying it both together, and adjust your assessment cycles according to the value of the network resources that you have that you need to protect. Next half of the vulnerabilities still exists in the network a year later. So basically be sure that your process, your strategy, your management processes completely remove all the vulnerabilities from your system. This includes things like updating configurations for your new devices, checking out, making sure that you understand vulnerability risks. Well, basically taking your vulnerability risk down to zero. It's what I'm trying to say. And the third thing is vulnerability management is a never-ending process, and we all know that. Security never ends. Our job never ends. There's a zero unemployment rate, and there's a reason for that. So implement management metrics that you need to refine the best practices for your vulnerability management system. It's very difficult to manage what you cannot measure. So I go into many organizations, I don't do it anymore, but assessments, even where I am now, we're still updating our processes and our metrics. And as you all know, metrics tell the story. Okay? So we have to make sure we have good metrics. Now, best practices says continually test assets for weaknesses. Okay? Test your critical assets a minimum of every 5 to 10 days if you can. So this is, I'm going to get to this later on, but this is one of the dynamic best practices that I'm going to talk about later that helps you decrease the number of vulnerabilities in your organization. Next, we have the law of persistence. And with the law of persistence, basically a few vulnerabilities are never going to totally disappear from your network security profile. So you can scan and all that kind of stuff. There's still going to be some lingering things perhaps that you're not going to find. So scanning after patching still captures your vulnerabilities recurring in the network, and these vulnerabilities can reappear for a variety of reasons. For example, they may be born in application code that's out there, reintroduced via some new system installations that you put out, or come from computing devices like your BYOD devices again that you added to your network. So what do you need to do? You need to scan configurations of new equipment to be sure they do not reintroduce old vulnerabilities to your network. So be sure your processes for deploying new equipment require scans for vulnerabilities first. After all the software has been installed, everything has been configured, you still want to scan for any problems you might have. Be alert for vulnerabilities that may be lurking in your application code. We know that a lot of things that happen within our organization, within our systems, come from application code errors. You know, it's relatively easy to find SQL servers during the SQL Slammer attack, for instance, that was out. But it was very difficult for IT departments to determine what applications had embedded the Microsoft database engine MSDE. I'm reading this, which was a problem. Okay, one of the best practices. Continually test assets to uncover reintroduced weaknesses. Scan your critical assets a minimum of every 5 to 10 days, like I said before. Make sure it's an ongoing process for you to try to identify and eliminate weaknesses within your process, within your system. The law of exploitation. So I want you to keep an eagle eye on what your vendors are doing in your system as well. Okay, make sure that well, let me say this. I start with what I have at the top. 80% of vulnerability exploits occur within 60 days of your vulnerability release. Let's say that first. So the announcement by a product vendor about a security patch or upgrade starts the race between enterprises deploying corrections and attackers exploiting the vulnerability. You know, you have your 0 day. We don't know about it yet. So traditionally, there's a period of several weeks before an exploit is actually unleashed. However, this time frame is starting to get smaller, shrinking, of course, and security teams can no longer count on a 6-month time frame or a 6-month window before they start to see worms and viruses and all that type of stuff. So if we look at today's products, today most vendors don't even announce a vulnerability until there's a patch available in the first place to protect us, because that's just the way they build things these days. So as I was saying, you want to keep an eagle eye on key vendors for early warnings of available patches for critical resources. You want to make a team decision or organizational decision on when you need to patch. So in some unintentional situations, the patch may place the company's business processes more at risk than the vulnerability itself. As I told you a little earlier, sometimes you put a patch in place and you don't know how it's going to affect your organization. I worked at a government organization. We stayed, I think it was 3 iterations back, which means we were kind of vulnerable, right? We were vulnerable because we're 3 iterations back, but we also could not have this process go down. It had to be available 24/7. It was very critical, so we had to test these patches, make sure everything was okay before we put them in place. We want to integrate with automated procedures. I talked about that before, but time is of the essence when you have to make a go decision on applying a patch or any type of thing that you have to do within your organization when there's an exploitation. So you need to integrate information from your vulnerability management system with your patch management and your configuration control systems in order to accelerate the accurate remediation of any vulnerabilities that you might find. Right? So those are the laws of your laws of well, cybersecurity, or your laws of vulnerabilities, as I called them. And I didn't call them that, but as they called them that. So this is kind of the vulnerability management life cycle. I'm not going to go into it and go over the 9 steps this time. We talked about this before in one of my webinars. However, we have our policy. Everything is established. Everything is done based on our policies. Our process, our standards, our guidelines come first from our policies, and they're there to support the policy. I talked about inventory. I talked about knowing what you have. I talked about prioritizing. Then we figure out our vulnerabilities, determine what they are on each asset. I mean each asset that we have. Look at the potential threats after we know what those vulnerabilities are. Figure out what our risk levels are. Remediate, as I spoke about before. Fix the vulnerabilities. Measure what we've done and make sure that we are in accordance with compliance regulations, compliance and policies. Now, here are 6 steps of vulnerability management that I want to go over for you. So I'm going to go each one of these individually with just as up front we have discover and inventory assets. I talked about that. Categorize and prioritize them. Scan for vulnerabilities, as we spoke about. Report, classify, and rank them. Remediate, and then verify. I talked about these, but I want to add just a little bit more to each one of these as we go on. Now, say we have to discover and inventory those assets, what IP devices we have, the software, all the configurations, everything has to be looked at. Categorize it, as I spoke about before, and inventory it. Know what you have. Right? Not only know what you have, but it says what is the business value of those assets. And something that we talked about at work today, if we have an asset and it has no purpose or we really don't need it, maybe we don't need to keep that asset. We even talked about that with our risk levels. As I said, we have 98% of all the healthcare market that we take care of. With that being said, we have to look at all the information that we store on patients and members, and we have to say, do we really need all this? Do we really need to store all this information, or can we get rid of some of this? And that's the conversation we actually started today and we're having right now. Categorize and prioritize. Scan for those vulnerabilities again. As I said, automated scanning keeps you up to date, it's accurate, and it scales to your large networks where people are going to be harder to scale. It's going to be harder to hire people. Test the effectiveness of your security policy and controls. Step 4, report, classify, and rank, as we spoke about. Create manual or automated reports. Of course, I suggest automated reports. No more storing things in an Excel file sheet, or I can't remember that system that we all use to store our data. I can't think of it right now. Maintain an overview of our instant risk analysis. Prove compliancy with regulations. Make sure that we are in compliance with those regulations. Number 5, remediate, to apply patches, update fixes, pre-test those patches like I spoke about in my example before we put it into before we deploy them. Now, what do you do when you don't have a test environment? You know, test dev and ops. You know, well, maybe you can do it on virtual machines. I'm not sure. I'm sure that most of you had a strategy in place for you to test the environment. Now, I'll tell you this. I've seen many organizations that in some cases, some types of patches, and you probably do this on yourselves, some type of patches, they'll deploy them right away. And I still don't recommend that because we don't know the effect it's going to have on our particular environment. And number 6, verify. Rescan, rescan, rescan. Okay? Update your remediation workflow. Make sure you rescan, look at it again. Now, Yankee Group looked at this dynamic best practice model. And I said I was going to come back and I was going to revisit this dynamic model and talk a little bit about that. And that's kind of where I'm going to end some of my conversation today. So we have 4 phases. We have classify our assets, measure our assets, integrate our patch management strategy, and then audit for performance. This is our dynamic best practice group. Dynamic best practice. So basically what this is that based on the key findings from this Yankee group and the findings from those laws of vulnerabilities, they came up with this best practices that we apply for vulnerability management as a one solution type of IT solution. Now, I'm not saying this is the only way to do it. I'm not saying this is the best way of doing it, but this is a way of doing it, okay? So first we classify our network. So we're going to identify and we're going to classify network resources to see, of course, what we have, what type of things we have. I talked a little bit about the law of half-life, and I told you that it tells us about 50% of network resources will be protected within the first 30 days of an enterprise, when our enterprise is aware that a vulnerability exists. So by understanding and classifying our assets to a category, it allows our IT folks, it allows our security folks to apply the policies more efficiently to our systems and to our enterprise. So if our organization, if our organization is time or resource constrained, like most of us are, doing it this way is going to enable the security team to focus on patching the most critical assets first, and that's what we want to do. So we want to classify network resources, first of all. We're going to have like maybe 5 to 20 different categories of network assets that we need to prioritize by value to the business, by the ability to manage the assets as a group, and go on and on. And then we need to tier the hierarchy of assets by value to the business. So our critical databases, our financial systems, our other business critical assets, are of course going to have a higher category than say our desktop, our clerical desktops, our remote laptops, those type of things. Right? Now we want to make sure our network. I'm moving into measure, but I want to go back just for a moment. I want to touch on a couple other things here. So you also, when you're looking at classifying, you want to be able to limit the higher priority categories by ability to manage those vulnerabilities. So it's vital to be able to patch the most critical assets before an exploit is released, as I said before. So this Yankee group, what they recommend is that enterprises completely protect the higher priority categories against vulnerabilities within 21 days to defeat the law of prevalence that we spoke about earlier. Okay? You want to classify those assets, asset priorities based on the value to the business, and do not give critical assets a lower categorization because you assume that they are safe. You can't assume that they're safe. Exploits are going to find their way into your network. So you need to place those critical business processes in a higher priority and not a lower priority. Now, let's move on to measure. So our vulnerability management solutions, we want to, well, whatever solution you have, you want to be able to test your network resources for the presence of known vulnerabilities also. Okay? You want to be able to produce some type of record where you can see what it is, or through scanning or whatever that's on your system. So I have here, measure your network against the half-life and persistence curves, which I have here. And what that means is that you want to beat that half-life curve by graphically tracking the percentage of vulnerabilities that you mitigate within that 30-day period. And then also the number of vulnerabilities that extend out past 180 days or 120 days or whatever it may be. So you need to be able to track all your vulnerabilities and have some type of useful process for measuring so that you know what you're dealing with. The second point I have is you have to measure your team performance by the half-life results and treatment of those persistent laws, that persistence law that I talked about earlier. So you need to chart the performance of each security team by the assets that you have in those asset categories. I'll just leave that at that. And then you want to use the metrics that you gather to communicate the security problem to your senior management so you can put the right processes and procedures in place. Then you want to integrate. Okay? You want to integrate your systems next. So you want to have your vulnerability management strategy provide some common measures, or I'm sorry, common measurable indication that your network is as secure as it can be. Okay? And you want to well, we talk about best practice. So your best practice of a lot of other organizations, a lot of leading enterprises, to integrate the intelligence gain into the entire security team cycle by identifying those assets, as I spoke about, and then removing the vulnerabilities. How do we do that? We do that first by integrating with discovery systems such as network integrity systems that we might have to find new servers and desktops that's on our network. And also we might want to schedule a vulnerability scan once we detect these things to see what it is out there. We all know that even one single vulnerable computer can compromise our entire network. Another thing we want to do is integrate with patch management systems to confirm completion of the task. Most of us don't trust patches enough to actually automate distribution of patches without going back and looking at them, making sure that this thing has been done correctly. So we want to scan for that as well. And then we want to integrate into the management reporting portals. That means we want to take the mystery out of security by reporting on operational progress that we have on achieving vulnerability goals based on those laws of vulnerabilities that I introduced you to just a little while. And I would say go back and make sure you download this later on and go back and look at those and use that. So the best practice for this, for raising the level of awareness among your executive level management, the executive staff, is for you to come back and have this management reporting portal or some type of management reporting built into your vulnerability management system. Of course, we need to audit. All right, so we need our management program to deliver some fundamental, as I have here, some fundamental metrics in order to understand the state of our infrastructure that we have in place, or our network security program. Okay, so we want to use these metrics that we develop here to evaluate our successes and our failures for the different efforts that we have and that we put in place throughout our year or whatever it may be. So how do we do that? First, we evaluate our actual vulnerability management results against some targeted metrics that we've established. We want to get in the habit of setting and exceeding our performance goals that we have for our organization or for our security team or whatever it may be. We need to regularly review vulnerability management reports with the security team to make sure that they understand what's happening. They need to understand what could be affecting the organization. We need to brainstorm with them on better methods for handling vulnerabilities. All this should be done as a team effort. Okay? And one thing I want to say, make sure that you perform post-mortems also when you have an incident occur, or if you have some type of exploit. Make sure you get the lessons learned done. And the last thing I have here is measure the performance of security teams by the reduction of your critical vulnerabilities. Compare your team's performance by recognizing the leaders, recognizing your teammates, all that type of thing. Have them build some peer pressure. That's okay with us. Peer pressure is going to encourage your security team members to share their experiences on actions that they've taken in the past. And then what is that going to do? That's only going to help your incident response and your vulnerability management program in the long run. Right? And the last thing I want to talk about just a little bit is I keep emphasizing automation over manual systems. And why is that? Because that automated process gives you control and visibility into your organization and your infrastructure, unlike anything you could do with human error, with humans. There could be human error, there could be people overlooking things. The machine is not going to overlook it unless it's configured incorrectly. And you can't take things out of a box. You need to configure it for your particular organization. Automation automates most elements of your vulnerability management in an efficient and cost-effective manner. Instead of me having 5 security analysts doing 24/7 watching of traffic coming through, I can have 1 machine to do that and not pay 5 yearly salaries. It also enables me to cut enables all of us to cut our vulnerability management expenses by 50 to 90% based on what I just told you before. I don't need 5 guys. I need 1 guy to configure and monitor the tool. Now, this isn't, I'm not going to say that you can't. I am going to say that you cannot throw technology at all your problems, but automation and technology, of course, can indeed help the situation that we may have. Now, with that being said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Alex, and he's going to talk a little bit more about his aspect on vulnerability management.
Thank you, Derek. Let me get my screen here showing for you guys. All right, guys, my name is Alex Dacosta. I'm the product manager here for Retina for a vulnerability management solution at Beyond Trust. I just honestly want to spend just a couple of minutes going over our Retina solution, more specifically from the output perspective. What can this solution offer you as an output after you've run scans? And kind of talking on a lot of the topics that Derek was covering, especially right now with the automation portion. Absolutely, you should have a solution that works for you, one that goes out and automatically discovers everything that's in your environment, one that automatically scans for vulnerabilities and generates the reports that your team need and automatically deliver those reports to those teams via emails, via notifications, automatically save them on a share, so that you're really just coming into the solution to go deeper into that data and not babysitting it, not wasting time sitting there waiting for a scan to complete, etc., but having that all automatically happen behind the scenes. So going back to kind of the output, scanning, honestly, everybody can scan in this space. It's not kind of a sexy topic, if you will. It's more of the output. Getting away from the, here are 500 pages worth of data we found in your environment, and good luck with that, right? That doesn't help anybody. That actually sort of makes people put that aside and not really do anything. So I want to share a couple of examples on how within just 1 or 2 pages we can tell you, if you just do this, it will have the biggest impact in your environment today. And then secondly, over time, what has been happening? Sort of accountability. Are we actually fixing things? Are certain teams better than others, if you will, and sort of have them kind of compete against each other to make sure that everything is getting remediated within the right amount of time? So here's my first report. It's an executive summary, just a little high level. Will show me eventually over the last 12 months at the top how many systems I'm finding every month, or systems within a high or medium risk, or the number of exclusions my team might be making month after month, as well as the top 10. Right now, what are the top 10 or high or medium risk vulnerabilities? Being able to dive into any value and actually see what systems are affected by those vulnerabilities today. How many days on the very right-hand side, how many days has that vulnerability been present on each of these systems? Go into the vulnerability name, see descriptions, fix information, references, all right here within 1 or 2 clicks from a dashboard. Now, granted, I would never run a top 10 executive report to know how I fix something. I would run a more technical report to get right to this immediately. But the takeaway is that any of the reports we have, which are about 300 or so out of the box, have this ability of drillability. Now, let's look more of a way to dynamically look at my information. So we have this concept of smart groups. Here on the screen, you see my threat analyzer. Each one of these squares represent smart groups. Think of them as business units. Another topic that Derek covered was classification of assets. You want to make sure the solution is trained, that it is smart and working for you, and it helps you prioritize based on what you've told it about certain groups of assets and the criticality of those systems. So here within the threat analyzer, I have these groups. The bigger they are on the screen, the more at risk that environment is compared to the other ones, also based on profiles. How about critical vulnerabilities that are open for more than 30 days? Which of these groups are falling behind? Or maybe they're associated with malware or some event in the wild like Stuxnet. I can use that to help me prioritize and eventually dive into one of those particular groups and do some risk reduction forecasting. How would that environment improve after I fix the top X number of vulnerabilities? So let's start with the top 20. If I fix that in this particular environment, I will have a risk improvement of 23%. 23% of the vulnerabilities would be remediated, and there are 47 assets that would be affected. At the bottom of the screen, I will have a list of those 20 vulnerabilities. Now, I can play with that 20. What if I do the top 100? And this is one vulnerable lab that I run here. So we can see that even the top 100 vulnerabilities gets me to a 48% risk improvement. 57% of the vulnerabilities are gone. And you see there at the bottom the list of what gets me there. Under the mitigation column, I do want to point out that we can always customize the reports so that they make sense for the audience. In particularly the mitigation factor. Who's the audience? Are they patching? Are they going to do patching? Thus, I'm going to filter this by security update. Maybe they're looking at 0 days. That's the focus this particular week. Let's filter by those. Or maybe there are others, configuration changes, etc. The point is, it's not just one report for everybody. That equals a lot of noise. We can always filter so that it makes sense for the audience. Now let's look at trending reports here. Let's look at an SLA. With the SLA report, I can specify a particular time period, and I'll focus on everything I have in my lab from February all the way till this month. I can narrow my scope again to that concept of smart groups. These are logical groups of assets you guys will build to mimic your environment. You will have different SLAs for different environments. SLAs is basically how long do we have to remediate a vulnerability based on its risk. So for my case, if it's a high-risk vulnerability, we've got 2 days, medium 7 days, and lows we've given 14 days. And that is something that I have for my demo lab, for example. So I will go ahead and generate an SLA report, which again, for my lab, is just me. I don't do much fixing here. We can see that I barely do any fixing. I don't meet any of my own SLAs, right? Back in February, I didn't meet any of the highs, 4% for medium, 12% of the low vulnerabilities were actually fixed within that SLA. So here's a way to have accountability. There are actual accounts of mine that I have that print these out and sort of post them on a board so different team members can kind of see who's doing better than the other ones, kind of gets everybody going. But with that, I also want to show you our delta by month. The delta by month really shows us, again, over time, what is happening. So for this particular case, I'll just choose all the time I have in my lab, which again just goes back to February. All of the data that you see me generate here, all of this data resides in-house. None of your vulnerability data lives your premise. It's all in-house. It all lives behind in a SQL database. This is all being driven by SQL reporting services, analysis services, which in turn allows you to eventually do year-to-year comparison of your data. From our trending perspective, we can see everything graphically as well as numerically. So we can see here how many vulnerabilities have come in, were fixed, or we're still there at the end of each month. And you can see my existing keeps growing as I do mostly collecting vulnerabilities every month. I don't do much fixing. And here, next page, same data set with a couple of other data points, such as average age and fix time by the end of each month. We can also see exactly how many vulnerabilities are we starting with, how many did we fix, how many came in new, and ultimately, what did we end with. Now, lots of variables at the top here for parameters, whether or not you want to specify a particular smart group you want to trend on, particular severity you're interested in trending on, etc. Again, really customize it so it has the data that you are interested in, and you can check yourself, check the teams, make sure that we are actually remediating what we need to remediate, and go into any particular item. I can go into July and the 85 vulnerabilities that were fixed, get down to the details of what machine, what vulnerability was fixed in the month of July, down to even how many days it took to fix it. That's the very last column from the very first day we found it. Now, the last thing I want to show you guys is going to be our clarity reporting. And lots and lots of options here, just really touching on a few of our reports to give you a sense of what we can do. But our clarity report is some of the latest reporting or analytics that we've added to the solution. And this is cluster mapping behind the scenes. So to give you an example, let's just scan your environment and we discover all of your systems and we start to audit them. Part of that scanning, it does a lot of enumeration. We find out what operating systems you have, what apps are installed, what ports, services, shares are running in each of these machines. As the data comes back into Beyond Insight, we start to see patterns among these machines, and we start to put the systems into the same cluster. This all happens behind the scenes. You don't have to worry about this portion. Now, this is to help you find anomalies over time. Let's say that I circumvent our security and I start installing any given application I want. I go to any site and I just start downloading things, and eventually my system maybe gets compromised, gets malware, which equals new ports getting open, new services running, obviously new apps running, changes to the system, etc. Subsequent scans by Retina will find these changes. Beyond Insights, analytic and reporting, specifically Clarity, will move my machine from the cluster it was in to a different cluster because I am no longer the same as my peers. So we have the concept of cluster movement as one of our reports to point out systems that keep moving around, they keep having changes to them, a clear indicator that they're probably compromised or the user is doing things that fall outside of the norm compared to your population of users. Now, you'll notice on the right-hand side of this chart, there's some data points there that don't really have to do with vulnerability management, right, except for the first one, scan data there, scan events. Beyond Insight and Beyond Trust as a company has other solutions under its sort of umbrella. We have list privilege type of solutions for Windows, for Macs, for Unix, Linux. We have a password safe solution. We also have a connector into Palo Alto. The point is that the more solutions you either have from us or the connectors you might be making to things like Palo Alto enhance what we can provide about a system. Not just the footprint of it and how it might be changing and thus might be compromised, but we can also see what the user is actually doing. We can see what it's clicking on. Is the user an administrator or just a standard user? Is the user running an application that's vulnerable? Right? Right now, everybody in this space simply provides you a list of vulnerabilities that are found. It does not tie to the fact that the user is or is not actually using that application, which can really help you prioritize your patching efforts. That's something that we can do. We can actually tell you who is running vulnerable apps. Let's go patch those first. So just to drill down into one of these guys, let's go into Prometheus here. What you will see is sort of anomalies about the system and about the user. So Prometheus is one of the guys I use here for my lab, one of my servers. And here, the first column, outliers. These are all vulnerabilities that in most cases have a high or medium risk, but point being that they're outliers. I don't see those vulnerabilities anywhere else in my environment. There always seems to be patterns. So maybe the user installs certain apps, Adobe, etc., that is not part of the normal sort of deployment process, and thus introduce vulnerabilities that only this machine has. Clarity is going to point that out to me. As I move towards the end of this, I can also see any type of attacks that are associated with the machine. This could be information coming from Palo Alto, for example. As I continue to the last pages, I see malware associated with the machine. This can be information collected by the Retina scanner. This is the hash information that we collect as part of scans. We enumerate the hash of services, processes running. We send that over to our cloud and analyze it against 60 or so different antiviruses to see if it maps to any sort of malware. Bring that to your attention. And the very last section, PowerBroker for Windows, this is the concept of having that view as to what is the user clicking on. Are these, you can see the different columns there at the bottom. Is it the first time that app is ever run in the environment? Is that app an outlier? We don't see that anywhere else. Is it vulnerable? Is it attached to malware? These are all threat levels that get summed up based on the user, based on the asset, and brought up to your attention within Clarity. So with that, I will turn it back to Sarah. Sorry, I ran a little late.
Hey, no problem, Alex. Guys, real quick, we're going to jump into some Q&A, but before we do, actually, while we run Q&A, I have one more poll for you guys based on what you saw. Would you like to receive a free trial? If you select yes, you will receive an email with license details, and you'll be able to test it out and run in your own environment. So I'm going to leave that up for a couple of moments while we run through some questions that came in. Alex, can you run vulnerability to devices reports as well?
Yes. So as a rule of thumb, anything that has an IP address can be assessed. So anything from your standard Windows desktops, your servers, network devices, switches, routers, firewalls, appliances, yes, these will all be in scope.
Hey, Derek, what tools allow for automatic ticket generation after vulnerability scans? What would you recommend?
I'm sorry, I was on mute. So, I mean, everyone is familiar with the Remedy tool, so you can kind of configure that to work with your vulnerability management system. I guess that's one that everybody's familiar with and using. We still use that where I am now. There are some newer ticketing systems out there, but Remedy has been reliable for us.
And to add to that, our Beyond Trust solution, or Beyond Insight solution here, Beyond Trust, will integrate with Remedy, as it is quite popular, as well as ServiceNow, so that all of the scan data, any critical findings, et cetera, can automatically open a ticket within these solutions, as well as others, but sort of ServiceNow and Remedy seem to be the most popular.
Yes.
Hey, Derek, is the integration of a patch management system more important than the integration of a ticketing system? Does integration with only the ticketing system work the best, or do both of them need integration with your vulnerability scanning product?
Well, both of them do need integration. However, of course, if we don't have a ticketing system, we have to have a system in order to deal with our remediation process and things like that. But what's most important is that we have a way to manage vulnerabilities, and that's going to be the most important. The ticketing system is going to serve your vulnerability management system. Yes, we do need it, but if I had to choose one, of course, I'm going to choose to have a great vulnerability management system in place.
One last question, and then I want to be cognizant of everybody's time here since we're hitting the top of the hour. Do you think threat intelligence exchange would help substantiate vulnerability management and remediation of risk?
Absolutely, especially in my field, the healthcare field or financial industry or whomever it may be. But I think that as we share our experiences, we share what's happening, we share our intelligence, just like we did in law enforcement when I was an agent, we've become more proactive, we've become better at what we're doing based on our shared experiences. So absolutely, this is something that we need to start doing, not only between private sector or government sector, but between the both. Government sector needs to share with private and vice versa. And even with other countries, we need to start sharing because they're experiencing things that we may not have experienced here yet and vice versa. So that's very important.
Fantastic. Well, Derek, it's always a pleasure having you here during our webinars. Thank you so much. Very insightful today. And to everybody who joined, thank you for spending the last 60 minutes or so with us. We really do appreciate your time and your commitment to coming to these webinars. As a reminder, you will be receiving a link to the recording and the PowerPoint presentation shown today. It will come to you via an email. It will come from communications@beyondtrust.com, so be sure to whitelist us so you receive that without interruption. and we look forward to seeing you guys at the next one. So again, take care, have a great day, and talk to you soon. Bye-bye. Thanks, guys.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.